Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And this is Julia, and we're back with episode number 35 of the Mixology Talk podcast. Now, we've made our fair share of jokes about crazy cocktail ingredients that you can find in fancy cocktail bars nowadays. Like, what was it? Unicorn tears?
Yeah, and like leprechaun farts, right?
Yeah, something like that. But it's not to say we're against making your own stuff. Although I don't know where you're going to find a leprechaun.
Or a unicorn, for that matter. But yeah, there are some ingredients that are really easy to make that can give you a ton of flexibility in the cocktail that you're trying to create.
So today we're going to talk about some of the ingredients that you can make for your cocktails without getting too crazy or getting too complicated. So the first ingredient I'd like to mention is probably also the type of ingredient that I see Chris making the most. It's also the reason we buy our sugar in 25-pound bags.
I don't have a problem.
You've probably already guessed it, but we are talking about flavored simple syrup.
We've previously talked about how easy it is to make simple syrup, and I think we touched upon the idea of making flavored syrups in a video and a podcast as well.
I think we did.
Yeah.
In the, I think it was in the Simple Syrup podcast.
I think you're right.
That would make sense.
But today I would like to make the case that this is one of the best ways to start. And if you're trying to design, your own cocktails, this is a fantastic place to get everything and get started.
I couldn't agree more. The great thing about making flavored simple syrups is that the cost of ingredients is virtually nothing, especially if you're buying your sugar in bulk like us. So if the syrup doesn't turn out quite right, you're not going to lose a lot of sleep over throwing it all away.
Another great reason to start with flavored simple syrup is that it's extremely flexible. I couldn't even list all of the different types of syrup I've made in the past, but in general, this works pretty well with fruits, spices, a lot of different ingredients.
You made tea-flavored syrup, too, once, right?
Yeah, I basically just made the tea the way that you usually like to drink it, actually.
Hey, wait a minute. I might use a good amount of sugar, but it's not that much.
Oh, you can stand a spoon in it, but other than that, it's fine. We already admitted to the buying of sugar in a Costco, and I think that pretty much says everything right there.
No comment.
Yeah, yay, winning. But yeah, simple syrup is a really great place to start. I've had a couple of videos on the topic of flavored syrups, so I'll definitely include those in the link to the show notes for those of you that are going to nerd out on this and want more details. So,
all one of you.
Right, exactly.
Named Chris.
So check them out over at mixologytalk.com/35.
35.
So I think probably the next step up in your DIY cocktail ingredients are infusions. While infused simple syrup is technically an infusion, in this case I'm referring to infusing things into alcohol, typically a neutral grain spirit, but not always.
Not always. Back when Chris and I started dating,
that's a great story.
Story time. He was making infusions for the bar program where he was working. He would tell me and all of our friends about this fancy infusion machine that he used at work and made a really, really big deal out of it. A week or two later, he brought it home. Turns out his fancy infusion machine was a massive pickle jar.
Yeah.
Here we were all thinking that making infusions was this crazy culinary process when in actuality, Chris was just filling up a stinking pickle jar.
Yeah, I couldn't believe you guys actually believed that for as long as you did.
Oh man, we still resent that story.
No, you don't.
For everyone out there, I do recommend this prank for all your friends. If anything, just make me feel better that I'm not the only one who's been had.
Right. So back to the subject of infusions. Julia's definitely right. I literally made all of these infusions for our restaurants in massive Lexan containers that look like pickle jars. That way they'd all be cleaned. Now, if I remember correctly, I was making a fig-infused vodka at the time. Basically, I'd get a big Lexan container, fill it with a couple of pounds of figs, make sure they're clean, and top everything off and fill it with vodka.
Did you chop them up or were they whole?
They were chopped.
They were.
Mm-hmm. Then I'd store them in a cool, dark place and wait for a couple of weeks, stirring and tasting them every couple of days, and basically just to figure out when I should stop the infusion.
And that's about as fancy as the process is. There are a couple things that you're going to want to keep in mind, though, if you are making infusions.
Yeah. First, you should know that different ingredients will infuse at different rates. Everyone who has made infusion with peppers, like jalapeno or habanero, know that these infusions can take as little as a couple of hours. And if you're not careful, you may have a really spicy booze on your hands if you let the thing run.
And none of your friends are going to want that Bloody Mary.
Right, exactly.
Secondly,
it'll be a dare.
Yeah, really. Secondly, you should know that the strength or proof of your infusing liquid will also affect the speed of infusion. That's why tinctures and bitters, which we're going to talk about in a minute, are typically made with Everclear or other high-proof spirits, because they typically extract more flavor.
Yeah, definitely. And third, the size of the item you're infusing matters. Imagine that you're making a strawberry-infused bourbon. If you drop whole strawberries into a container of bourbon, you're going to have to wait a long time for that strawberry flavor to kind of go inside of the bourbon. If you chop them up into smaller pieces, not to get too nerdy, but the surface area increases.
Nerd.
And your no, I can't help myself. But the extraction process will happen faster the higher the surface area is.
It does make sense, though. You also want to make sure that whatever you're infusing is fully covered up by the liquor. If you have bits of fruit sticking up out of the I don't want to call it water level, but liquor level, and you leave the bottle in a cupboard for 3 weeks, you're going to end up with some fuzzy little fruit icebergs and ruin the whole batch.
Yeah, finally, to Julie's point, keep the infusion in a cool, dry place, preferably a dark place. Stir it periodically and taste fairly frequently to make sure that you want to stop the infusion when it's right for you. If it's too strong, you can always dilute it with more alcohol, and that ideally you wouldn't have to do, though.
Overall, I'd say the best way to get started is to just go ahead and Google a recipe. Somebody out there in the universe has probably already made the infusion that you're thinking of. Sorry, guys. And that way, that other somebody can make the mistakes and, frankly, ruin their batches, so you don't have to. So you can go ahead and use their advice on what your proportions are, how much stuff to put in it, what to infuse it with, how small to chop it, and how long to wait.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I know I've definitely ruined a few batches in the past.
It's expensive.
And it's a learning process. You know, it's something that you just kind of have to do.
Yeah.
And but the key is definitely just to start doing it. If you're a cocktail nerd like me, feel free to dig in and make your own recipes. I would very highly recommend that you're careful to document everything that you do so you can improve the recipe the next time. Or if it comes out great, you can make it over again. Now, the beautiful thing about infusions is that you get to kind of capture all the freshness of really, really highly seasonal fruits at the peak of their ripeness. So it's a really great technique for preserving some really fantastic flavors.
And if you're only doing it one time of the year, like, for example, when that particular fruit is in season, you're probably not going to remember the recipe a year from now. So it's another good reason to write it down.
Absolutely.
So we briefly mentioned tinctures and bitters in the infusion section, and that's because that's basically all they are.
Yeah, tinctures are basically just really strong infusions, and bitters are tinctures that also have a bittering agent in them.
So yes, that is why you're seeing so many new craft bitters on the market nowadays, because they're not extremely hard to make, and frankly, there's pretty good profit margins in there.
Definitely a word of caution, however. I think it's really easy to forget that a lot of the stuff that we use behind craft bars for making bitters, they can be harmful. You know, in large quantities, in large doses, this stuff is basically can be medicine. You know, like quinine in tonic is a malaria treatment. So
that's true. And cinchona bark, I think, is another one that's a little bit risky.
So really do your research. You know, you don't want to harm anybody. You don't want to harm yourself. And most importantly, you don't want to harm your customers because, you know, at the end of the day, this is all fun, but if you don't know what you're doing, there is a probability that you can hurt yourself or others.
It's true. And I think there's no reason to risk it nowadays. There's so much information on the internet. I would say if you're going to be doing a tincture with any bittering ingredients at all, please take the time to do the research. It's just not worth it. And frankly, if you're nerding out that much, I mean, really, it's only just a little bit more nerding just to be sure you're doing it safely.
Right, exactly.
But I think in my mind, a really great and safer place to start is just with tinctures. And not only that, but with tinctures of the things that you would find in any normal spice cabinet. I like tinctures because they're generally done in very small amounts. So again, if you mess up, you're not ruining a huge amount of vodka. And not only that, but I like that you can use the stuff that you've already probably have in your kitchen.
Yeah, they're, some of my favorite tinctures are just basically, like you said, stuff that we already have in our cabinet. Some of my favorites are the cardamom tincture.
I love that one. You use that one quite a bit.
Yeah, that with rum and bourbon. Fantastic. Black tea, black pepper, actually.
Yep.
It's got that nice spicy note. It's just really a
That
great
one
tincture.
infuses really quickly, though.
It does, and
Gotta
it's
be
one
careful.
of those flavors that everybody can identify.
True.
The minute you say it, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's black pepper." So it's kind of a fun way of, kind of connecting with somebody's brain.
Connecting with people's brains.
That's what we do.
Here at A Bar Above.
The rosemary tincture, and one of my favorites of all time is the Rooibos chai tea tincture.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That one is really good. It's basically just tea that is a really heavy extract, and you get all those really kind of dark flavors. It's so good.
It's got an amazing flavor. That's true. And when you're using these tinctures, you're actually kind of using them in a similar way as bitters. I know Chris usually just uses an eyedropper and adds just a tiny, tiny amount to a drink. What's nice here is that you can add a lot of flavor without having to add a ton of volume to the drink. So it's really very simple to change the flavor of a cocktail without having to adjust the entire recipe. And what's also nice about that is, let's say you want to add, I don't know, let's go back to cardamom flavor. You don't have to go buy an entire bottle of, I think it's called Cardamaro, right? The liqueur?
Cardamaro, yeah. It's
which is a delicious liqueur, but if you're only going to use it once, that's really expensive. So if you were to make your own cardamom tincture, you get the benefit of the cardamom flavor without the Bevmo bill.
Right, exactly. Now, as far as making tinctures goes, you're going to use a really similar process to how infusions are made. Just go ahead and leave the infusion going for a lot longer, and put more material in there. Whatever material that you're trying to infuse, pack it in there. And that should go a long way to helping to intensify the final flavor. And I think, like Julia mentioned, a lot of the time I'll just use 6 to 10 drops at the most of tincture in a cocktail, and that's a lot still.
That's a lot of flavor.
Really, really intense flavor, and it's a cool way to add a really cool character to a cocktail.
Well, I like the word you used a minute ago, intensify. I'm not sure it is a word.
It is now.
It is now. And once again, you can make your tinctures in small amounts. Like I think we mentioned earlier, we use spice bottles. What this means is that you get a much larger variety for just one bottle. Actually, I think it was a couple bottles of Everclear. Chris also made a video on this topic too, and you can go ahead and see his totally geeky library of tinctures that he's created. We'll link to that as well at mixologytalk.com/35.
I want to say that was probably one of my favorite episodes.
Well, I would like to say that I'm pretty sure the entire reason he started A Bar Above was to be able to create this flavor library.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's some truth to that. So in summary, you can add a ton of flavor to cocktails by creating your own specialty simple syrups, infusions, tinctures, or bitters. And it's really not that hard to do.
So hopefully this episode has inspired a couple of you wonderful folks to go home and try your hand at some homemade ingredients.
If you do, let us know how it goes. Leave your comments over at mixologytalk.com/35. We'd love to see what you're making.
Stay warm out there, everyone. We will catch you next week.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.